Alright. I'd like to thank you all for coming to the 13th Annual Institute of Critical Animal Studies North America Conference. It's really exciting to have you all here. My name is Joe Schatz. I am the North American Director. This would not have been possible if it was not for the help of the 3CT department, which deals with cultural studies throughout intersections, as well as the help of the Rice University. Drew Winter and Larry Butts were instrumental in order to be able to sort of take care of everything on the ground in order to help organize the conference. And they did an incredible job of sort of like coordinating everything like that. And Drew will be up here to talk to you in a second. And Larry's the one who's going around taking care of any technological issues that you may have. This first panel is set up so that way everyone can have a background of what critical animal studies is, so that way we can have sort of a similar vocabulary on what we mean through the various different terminologies that we have. And we have some of the very initial instrumental people in sort of building up ICAS as an organization who are there on the ground floor, who have published a book about defining critical animal studies and sort of distinguishing it from other animal study fields that exist, and sort of carving a niche in terms of what it is that the Institute of Critical Animal Studies focuses on versus like human animal studies or animal research studies or other forms of animal studies that, that exist. And so I'm going to turn it over to Drew, who will be able to give you a little bit more of an introduction to the campus and the facilities, as well as then introduce who will be the chair of the panel and everything like that. So here is Drew Winter, everybody.
Thanks, Joe. Joe just really downplayed his involvement, which was absolutely crucial in putting this conference together. So I want to personally thank Joe for being really great and helping Larry and I out, who definitely couldn't have done it without him. I also want to thank Ten, who's associated with 3CT. He did a lot of very important work at the last minute to get us the rooms we had, to have the access we had, and to have all of our rooms be so close together. And I would like to thank the BRC for all the extra security today. I feel extremely safe. I very much appreciate that. Just some logistical stuff. I mean, there's bathrooms over here and over here, and we really encourage you to go out and take a look at the books that are available if you'd like to make a donation. Also the jewelry. And if any of you have any questions or concerns about the conference or any of the panels, please feel free to ask myself or somebody else who has one of these gorgeous lanyards. So I think that's about it. I would like to move it over to introducing Anthony Nocella, who has been a personal mentor to me and a really impressive individual. Anthony is a visiting lecturer at Hamline University. Is that right? Yeah. So without further ado, Anthony is also a director with the Institute of Critical Animal Studies. So if you have questions about the organization, you can speak to him. You can also see the organization website at criticalanimalstudies.org. So, Anthony.
So again, thanks so much for everyone coming. It's amazing. There'll be a lot more literature out there tomorrow. I see a lot of familiar faces that have been coming to these conferences, and I think that if we, don't teach oppression and exploitation, we won't be performing it in the corporate world. And so, as Drew was kind of noting, we're less than maybe 50 people in this room, but we are, shaking and, confusing and challenging this space that we are in right now and in higher education. And I think, as Foucault says, knowledge is power, and we need to tell the truth. And so today we have a wonderful group of people on this panel. Dear friends of mine, so I will just kind of quickly introduce them and then kind of let them introduce themselves. They have approximately 15 minutes or so. Is that fair? And then they'll have, I don't like to say Q&A, so kind of a structural, but a dialogue afterwards. And we'll make sure in this dialogue and every dialogue to make sure that we don't pick people repetitively, as well as we'll be, identifying identities as well when we do, choose and engage in conversation, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Yes. So, thank you, Kim. So, without any further ado, we have Jenny Edwards, Jenny and Michael online. They will be coming up, and Carol Glasser, who is going to be online via Skype, and this is live streaming. Every room will be live streaming, correct? Okay. And we have in person Vas and Kim, and they'll be introducing themselves and their titles. Is that fine? Okay. I didn't want to take too much time out of this presentation to do that. But then afterwards, if we can hold the questions and conversation at the very end, that'd be wonderful. If they can look at me, Carol will not be able to look at me, and Jenny will not be able to look at me, so I'll be kind of just verbally kind of queuing them up, or might type something on Skype. But you will have a 5-minute wrap-up, you'll have a 2-minute wrap-up, and then you'll just have a final wrap-up. So again, thank you so much for everyone coming. Thank you for all those presenters today, and we will begin with Kim, if that's okay. We'll go with Kim, Vas, and then Carol. Okay, we'll do Carol first? Okay, do the Skype first? Okay, do the Skype first. Okay, so Carol, you'll be going first. Can you hear me? If you can nod your head.
She's on the delay. Type through.
Okay.
I can also tell her to go now.
I'm currently not there because I'm finishing my last day as the research director at a torture victim rehab center, and soon I will be on to Minnesota State University, where I will be working as an applied sociologist and teaching human animal studies. So, thank you.
Sorry. I don't know why that mic is doing that. Keep on talking.
Yeah.
That might be a good idea. Yeah. Could you ask her to mute your speakers? She still looks good. Okay.
How long ago did this start prior to me walking in?
I'm sorry?
How long ago did this start prior to me?
I mean, they just started.
But that was the first talk?
Yes.
They didn't say anything interesting?
It's all interesting.
No, what did I questions what I miss?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yes.
It just started.
Okay, so you want me to talk again? Okay. Hi, my name is Carol Glasser. I will try to repeat what I just said. I am not there today, sadly, because I am finishing my last day of work as the research director at a torture victim rehabilitation center, and then I will be off to Minnesota State University, where I will be teaching applied sociology and human animal studies. So, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry everyone, I'm very confused about the process. So now I will begin my presentation, right? Okay, I'm so sorry everyone. Okay, the place where learning and knowledge are meant to occur is referred to as many things. University, post-secondary education, college, the academy, and of course, the ivory tower. The term ivory tower captures both the glories and the pitfalls of study and scholarship within the academy. For those concerned with the treatment, rights, and liberation of non-human animals, the term has additional significance. Literally, ivory is the direct product of the exploitation and killing of non-human animals. Further, the university is a space hostile to non-human animals, who are welcomed onto campus only insofar as they are used for food, research tools, or to assist the disabled. Similarly, the study of non-human animals as subject is undervalued. There are very few universities that have courses examining non-human animals as subjects of study, and animal studies scholars are often marginalized. In this chapter, my co-author Arpan Roy and I argue that rather than serving as a conduit that allows for the production and dissemination of new knowledge, institutional boundaries and professional indoctrination creates a scenario in which the attempt to produce knowledge goes nowhere. For those of us deeply embedded in and reliant on academic institutions for our livelihood and the expression of our intellectual passions, the ivory tower can unexpectedly become a trap. This ivory trap keeps knowledge production and dissemination limited. This is problematic because academics should aim to use their privileged position to better society by engaging with current social problems. Further, scholarship should advance an emancipatory ethic, intentionally opposing exploitation and inequality, and promoting liberation. It is our duty to use our privilege productively for the benefit of our communities. To address both the lack of research directed toward advocacy for non-human animals and research that is often esoteric and inaccessible, a clear line of praxis is needed. Praxis is theory and practice, scholarship for the sake of action and reflection, one supporting the other. Brazilian pedagogist Paulo Freire is often associated with the philosophy of praxis, which he sees as the only means by which to overturn oppression. Historically, animals have always been in the academy. However, they made their way in through the vivisection labs and the cafeteria. Animal studies is the first real attempt to incorporate animals into the academy as a subject. Animal studies first came to play through the field of androzoology and later through human animal studies. While these disciplines were a good step forward, they have not adequately addressed a praxis of liberation. Human animal studies, mostly through Animals and Society Institute, has been able to position animals as subjects sometimes. However, at times animals remain objects in the field through journals, such as the Journal of Animal Welfare Science, which studies issues such as how to house animals in laboratories or on farms. Further, human animal studies does not expect that the scholar is an activist or even an advocate for the research subjects. Human animal studies, like the rest of the academy, accepts that we do not have a responsibility to our stakeholders, that we can use them as research subjects and let the relationship end there. Critical animal studies provides a framework with the potential for academics to bridge the gap between the academy and the street. So now I'm going to outline some of the main issues with the connection between the academy and activism and discuss ways in which critical animal studies has the potential to overcome these hurdles. There are 10 main principles of critical animal studies that were developed in 2007 through collaboration between several scholars. In this chapter, we detailed how each of these provides a framework to help overcome the hurdles of connecting activism and the academy. Today, I will address and summarize just a few of the points we made in these chapters, and the actual orienting principles and the issues surrounding them are covered much more extensively in the chapter itself. Each chapter in the anthology overall is centered around one of the 10 main principles of critical animal studies. Our chapter was centered around the principle that we consider, that Arpan and I consider to be the golden rule of scholarship. That is the principle that critical animal studies eschews narrow academic viewpoints and the debilitating theory for theory's sake position in order to link theory to practice, analysis to politics, and the academy to the community. First, I will address the issue of a lack of access. The ivory tower can serve as a barrier to information for those without the desire, need, or socioeconomic status to gain admittance to or to attend post-secondary educational institutions. Critical animal studies attempts to push past this lack of access and acknowledge that activists and academics can learn from each other by making academic venues accessible and welcoming to non-academics, and by recognizing that knowledge can be generated outside of the confines of universities. Commitment to this principle is evidenced by the annual conferences organized by Institute for Critical Animal Studies, which feature activists and academics in the audience and on its panels, everyone being equals. Additionally, the Journal for Critical Animal Studies is currently the only peer-reviewed journal in the field, and importantly, it is available for free online in an open access format. Next is an issue of pedanticism and jargon. Academic language is often field-specific, filled with jargon and sophisticated language. It may be difficult for a trained person to understand, much less the average person not trained in the field of interest. This means that even when conferences, articles, and books are made available to activists and lay people, they can still be so difficult to understand that they remain effectively inaccessible. Academic language is developed as part of a method of establishing credentials and creating clear signals to identify disciplinary insiders. However, this sort of semantic gesturing is problematic. The point of research is to communicate effectively to those both inside of and outside of the academy. Critical animal studies, as envisioned by the 10 orienting principles, does not actually directly address the role of semantics in liberatory praxis. So we suggested the addition of an 11th principle. We seek to develop critical animal studies that produces knowledge that is not only relevant to social justice issues, but is also accessible to those whom the research can benefit. Jargon and esoteric language and publication formats are rejected in favor of accessible language, explanations, and formats of transmission. One way to achieve this without completely rejecting standard professional formats of publication and language is by producing dual publications. Academics can continue to write in the technical language of the academy while also writing up results for activists. These secondary publications can be produced in multiple formats, not all of which rely on the written word. Research can be presented in blogs, news articles, zines, YouTube videos, pamphlets, conferences, workshops, or through live internet chats like this one. Scholars are increasingly using the internet not only to bridge the gap between the academy and activism, but to widen the scope of what constitutes academic analysis. Certain academic publishing formats may also engender increased availability and comprehension. Books are easier to publish in accessible language than peer-reviewed journal articles and are more likely to be accessible for free from public libraries. Activists must seek to physically bring their research academics must seek to physically bring their research to activists and others outside of the academy. Public, semi-public, and other physical spaces such as parks, metro stations, and cafes are potential meeting grounds for such learning to take place. This could include free workshops in public spaces and community centers, developing projects with facilitators of certain public spaces like libraries, or conducting research directly with activists, or, when it is not non-human animals, in conjunction with the research subject. There's also a privileging of objectivity within the academy. The belief that the scholar should be impartial to the process and outcome of theory building and research. Therefore, it's often deemed unwise or inappropriate for people to study movements in which they're involved, for fear that they will not be objective enough. In reality, all research involves subjective elements, and pure objectivity on the part of the researcher is simply not possible. The pursuits of the disciplines that are considered more prestigious are erroneously viewed as purely objective. However, researchers always have their own biases as to what is an interesting or important topic, which in turn makes even the most technical and mainstream research constrained by the questions being asked. Interestingly, vivisection is viewed as objective science, even though the researchers almost always have personal financial gain tied into their research by way of funding from either pharmaceutical companies or government agencies. Conversely, critical animal studies scholars, who rarely receive large grants or have any personal monetary gain, and may even suffer negative professional repercussions for their work, are more likely to be deemed problematically subjective, highlighting this fallacy of objectivity. Not only should scholars promote liberatory politics and social movement tactics, but they need to live their values. Critical animal studies in its current iteration does not explicitly state in its orienting principles that scholars should have a personal, daily praxis that avoids exploitation and promotes liberation. But it is foundational to the type of work that we do. For an ethic of scholarship that can be truly beneficial to non-human animals or any exploited group, Scholars need to know their politics and be willing to embody a living example. The personal is political, and our work is personal. As such, we suggest an additional orienting principle for critical animal studies. That is, we seek to develop a critical animal studies that insists that scholars remain accountable to their research subjects. In regard to liberation politics, this means that scholars must not abuse, injure, degrade, exploit, cage, denigrate, or kill oppressed human groups, non-human animals, or the earth. Not only must scholars remain accountable to their research subjects, but their subjects are exploited or when their subjects are exploited or oppressed, the onus is on them to use their work to advance the rights of their subjects and to engender liberation when such actions are warranted or desired. Meaningful social change ultimately happens in the streets and not in classrooms or on listservs. This means that academics often have an obligation to be activists as well. So I'm going to sum up here, but the chapter goes into other points, such as the issue of being marginalized within our fields and the need to avoid knowledge for knowledge's sake. We also talk about the need to value all types of methodologies and how critical animal studies provides a framework to do this. Also, we hone in on the need to build interdisciplinary bridges and forge relationships with the community. And finally, we highlight and stress the need to acknowledge the interlocking nature of oppression. Critical animal studies acknowledges that there is no liberation without total liberation, and this needs to be the underpinning of all the work that we do. So to sum up, the best scholarship is fomented in the pragmatic needs of a community, and the ultimate realization of scholarship is when it informs or is informed by action. However, universities and colleges, the institutions charged with the development of new theory, ideas, and invention, have become entrenched in hurdles and boundaries that prevent a privileging of praxis. We have identified key problems within the academy that limit scholars and prevent a bridge between the ivory tower and the street. We identify these boundaries as inaccessibility, a fallacy of objectivity, methodological hierarchies, disciplinary boundary policing, and marginalization. We reject these tendencies in favor of scholarship aimed at having the potential to motivate activists and other citizens in struggles against oppressions. And we feel that the orienting principles of critical animal studies provide a framework in which we can do this. As vegan scholars focused on the study of social movements, we are particularly concerned with the liberatory potential of praxis in the field of animal studies. Non-human animals typically not only make their way into universities by way of the cafeteria, or the vivarium, and we see critical animal studies as the way to overcome this. Not only does critical animal studies advocate scholarship that sees non-human animals as subjects of research, not to be exploited in the process, but it pushes for liberatory praxis. Critical animal studies clearly delineates 10 orienting principles, to which we added 2 more in this chapter. These 12 tenets, taken together, can allow for a discipline that views the scholar as a bridge builder, someone who takes their privileged position to carry ideas and knowledge back and forth from cerebral spaces to physical spaces, and vice versa. In the end, the goal is to encourage activist scholars who view the relationship between community members and the academy as symbiotic, recognize the importance of scholarship to their communities, and are motivated by justice over institutional politics, and prefer revolution to promotion. Thank you.
Oh wait, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. It's bizarre because I can't hear myself or hearing the feedback. Okay. So in this chapter, Michael and I decided to reflect upon our processes of becoming PhDs, of entering academia, and then of also leading classrooms. And the chapter forced us to reflect on this idea of you challenge hierarchy, you challenge capitalism, you challenge the hierarchy of capitalism, and you think you're entering this field where you can teach. And you can teach your politics, and you can teach liberation, and you hope that you can push a radical agenda. And slowly what we have found is that only certain radical agendas work. I, as an anthropologist and instructor in a communications department at the University of Cincinnati, Michael teaches at George Mason University and Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., in the areas of peace and conflict studies and conflict and resolution. So, yes, human injustices matter within the academy, and yes, conflict matters when it deals with humans. But when not only do you push an agenda that challenges animal oppression, and that conflict can be the corporate destruction of the environment and the corporate consumption of species and the eradication of species, then all of a sudden you're doing something fringe. And fringe is not cool and niche. Fringe is challenging the privilege in which humans reside upon and exist upon in the academy. And so when we, when we started to write this chapter, we realized just how embedded privilege is within the academy and even within our own roles as academics. So on 2 of our course evaluations, what started the conversation about our roles as teachers is, if you're lucky enough to get the space to teach, which is an extremely lucky role anyway, if you're lucky enough to get that platform, you end up every month or every semester with your reviews, which read more like consumer reviews on Amazon than they do academic reflections on a course process. And 2 of the students in one of my courses went to the department head and were concerned that I was pushing a radical agenda. And Michael had a similar concern at the end of his first semester teaching at Georgetown. He does now on the rhetoric of terrorism. And it started this discussion amongst us and our department chairs about which courses students have the most visceral response to. And as the department head was saying, was that not all students have a visceral response to social justice or even leftist politics being taught. But it's when something challenges privilege that you assume is taken for granted. And so we started this conversation about whether or not that very review that's then put within our charts within our file within that university becomes a deciding factor on if we're rehired. And so we started talking about going to demonstrations and how we're very public with our politic, and not just a politic of veganism or of intersectional liberation, but more importantly that we support and condone and endorse a radical notion that animals should be liberated by any means necessary. And that was the CAST principle that we were tasked with discussing, was animal liberation by any means necessary in the role of the academy. So both of us as activists and as scholars have written on the ways in which we stand in solidarity with political prisoners, with this tactic and strategy that we believe is necessary within the current system that we reside. And what's interesting is that that is what gets the starkest response from students. And so the chapter navigates through personal reflection and anecdotal stories about contemporary happenings with us in the classroom, and then kind of concludes with a communique. Both of us, as practice, teach with primary source documents for our activism courses. I do protest and reform rhetoric, Michael does rhetoric of terrorism, and both of us by nature include and have students read communiques. And our thought on that is that there's not enough academic credence to giving the person who believes that any means necessary is appropriate, but then who creates an articulate document to justify and defend. So when you have a student read a communique that says, burning down a sheepskin factory is justified, not only is it justified, but it's necessary, and it's an eminent need that has to be met, because otherwise living beings will be tortured and killed, and we will continue to consume them. So having students read a communique, having them understand that you publicly endorse this. Both of us are very public in our activism. At 2 demonstrations recently, I had students come over to me that were attending, kind of blurs this line of what students are allowed to know about you. But then again, is that a bad thing? And our politic is, if we as professors occupy a space where they somehow view this as having more credence because the academic is taking the act rather than the random person at the demonstration, but the person who is, privileged with this idea of education and knowledge, coming in and attending a demonstration must mean that there's value to it, and that it actually has a point, or it's articulated within some larger philosophy and principles. And so it became this personal political, as Carol was talking about. Obviously for us, our political is personal. There is no distinction between. But when you as an academic, you as an activist are being defined as a terrorist within your department, which one of my students in the review of how I pushed a radical agenda concluded that ultimately the goal of my teaching was to transform these students into terrorists. I think it was like her exact phrase. Which is a difficult thing to respond to when someone looks at your syllabus and they see, I have them read communiques, Michael has them read a communique, and then he also has them write a communique for their class. You create an act, you articulate why you've taken the strategies that you've done, and then you write a communique, all in a hypothetical. When you do that, and then you have students kind of submitting these assignments and then calling you a brainwashing terrorist, you somewhat are pushed against a wall. And do you defend that you're not a terrorist, or do you defend that these activists are not terrorists either? So that's kind of how our chapter outlines. And then what we did was we concluded with something creative, because one of our challenges to the Academy is challenging knowledge production. So trying to do this collaboratively, trying to do this transparently, trying to make this as accessible to the public as possible, but then taking different means. So accessible not just in the fact that you have to buy something to read it, or you have to have access to a journal, but accessible in that it's not always written as theory. It's not always written as dense theoretical text that then has to be decoded within practical applications. So I actually wanted to read part of it because I think that it's interesting and it touches on the tone of the chapter and the tone of the project. So we start out with, to the students from Chile, Colombia, Britain, Canada, and elsewhere who took to the barricades to attack austerity, to the Mexican eco-insurrectionists who penned communiques to claim bombings while quoting Stirner, Kaczynski, Nietzsche, and Orwell, with precise footnotes, to the graduate students banging their heads against the walls of their classrooms, to the teachers from kindergarten to postgraduate that inspire social work. On a day to soon be actualized, we shall unite and revolt. We are the masses, those churning out commodities that alienate us from our bodies. Our thought is transformed into capital. The labor of teaching is only valued as part and parcel to the degree. Our contracts determined by customer, also known as student, evaluations, and the frequency we publish with prestigious presses. The commons were stolen and sold on the market without our consent. Our classrooms have been replaced, our courses turned cyborg through Blackboard templates. We joined the Academy with optimism that it bred revolution. Instead, we have seen how the privileged walls of the tower constrain thought and action. Our colleagues scoff at the ever so complicated pronunciation of speciesism, while the deans capitalize on our veganism as part of their green initiative. Students declare their love for animals in between sips from their Starbucks skim milk lattes. Conferences about exploitation structurally create barriers, class barriers through scheduling during work hours, and expensive membership and attendance fees. Universities are fed, cleaned, and maintained by underpaid, non-unionized contract workers who oftentimes are denied benefits. In order to defend animal liberation, these hegemonic practices in the Academy must cease. Single-issue politics reproduce systems of power and create a competitive environment for critical scholars. Rather than fight one another for space on the soapbox, we must think bigger. The entire landscape of this Academy needs to be re-envisioned. It is ineffective to argue one type of power is worse than another. Power over is always exploited. Power is constructed and situated at intersections. Neoliberal individualism must be replaced with collaborative collectivity. The terrorists are those alienating us from our colleagues, our thoughts, and our teaching. With all of this in mind, we formed a cell and made a plan of attack. During the early hours of the morning, at approximately 0300 hours, clandestine agents of the Something or Other Liberation Front, SOOLF, entered the facility located at blank street, blank USA, and left behind 4 time delay and center incendiary devices. Before placing the devices, we ensured that nothing living remained inside, and we disappeared into the night with armfuls of jubilant, 4-legged friends. We could smell the cleansing aroma of sweet liberatory vengeance. We hope that our actions are understood by the wider society as more than an act of isolated criminality, but instead as another salvo in an ever-accelerating social war for animal liberation. We submit this action as a gesture of solidarity. As we submit this action as a gesture of solidarity with those facing repression by the state and those that remain caged. The raid last night was the work of a small cell of friends who decided that enough was enough, talk was cheap, and that direct action gets the goods. Despite seeing our former allies turn snitch and friends exposed to be agents of the state, we trod on in our collaborative struggle against capitalism, speciesism, and the state. To those out there that feel isolated and alone, do not be discouraged. All you need to be a hero is a pair of bolt cutters, a pry bar, accelerant, and a map. If there are enough of you together, form a cell and strike. But if you find your vegan potlucks are a party of one, do not let this be a barrier to getting active. We should not be afraid to trust our comrades, just as we should not be afraid to act alone. If the state makes us suspect our lovers or spies, then they have already won. But if we can run with a free heart and a wild spirit, then no cage can contain us. The state likes to call us eco-terrorists, extremists, and other such nonsense, but we know enough to understand why. In 1939, a famous Chinese authoritarian revolutionary, known for his murderous reign, wrote, "It is good if we are attacked by the enemy, since it proves that we have drawn a clear dividing line between the enemy and ourselves. It is still better if the enemy attacks us wildly and paints us as utterly black and without a single virtue. It demonstrates that we have not only drawn a clear dividing line between the enemy and ourselves, but have achieved spectacular success in our work." It has been at the historical moments when we have been most successful that the state has painted us in the blackest of lights. We are the ones that closed Consort Beagle Kennels, Hillgrove Farms, Shamrock Farms, Regal Rabbits, New Church Farm, and have pushed Huntington Life Sciences to the brink of collapse any day now. We are the ones that have bankrupted fur stores and foie gras sellers, stole the Silver Spring monkeys, and burned Vail ski lodges to the ground. If success is a mark of separating a quote activist from a quote terrorist, then we deserve the title wholeheartedly. But if the term is used to separate the single-issue law-abiders from the revolutionary adoptees of the brick and the bomb, then we proudly stand in support of the latter. Not only do we stand in support of total liberation, we also stand proudly shoulder to shoulder with the accused. When we teach our children of the heroes of our time, we will tell the stories of Ronnie Lee, Robin Webb, Marie Mason, Daniel McGowan, Josephine Overaker, and Rod Coronado, and the late Barry Moore. When the cops and courts call our friends terrorists, it is our duty to redirect that accusatory hand at the real terrorists, the state and the species is capitalism. As the masked liberationist so famously said, the earth is not dying, it is being killed, and those who are killing it have names and addresses. These are the real terrorists, those that send terror to the hearts of the living, the vivisectionists, butchers, animal handlers, and farmers, and so on. We will also teach our children these names. We will teach them about Monsanto, Covens, Tyson Foods, Cargill, Ringling Brothers, SeaWorld, Novartis, and that fucking clown Ronald McDonald. We will teach our children that terrorists are corporations that terrorize and that real heroes wear masks and seek justice in the night. We need to make sure that our actions reflect the world we want to create and stand in stark opposition to that which we despise. Let us use ourselves as experimental laboratories for developing new ways of coexisting with one another. Use these small microcosms to practice participatory decision-making, positive anti-authoritarian collaboration, non-coercive divisions of labor, and emancipatory communication. If we only see ourselves as animal liberationists, earth liberationists, class warriors, and so on, we will remain isolated, which only serves to aid the interests of the state. We must begin to see our strikes outside of single-issue campaign mindset. Single-issue agendas cease to address systemic issues of intersections of power, and in fact help to sustain institutional mechanisms by normalizing our isolationism. For many of us who are, were, or will be students of, quote, higher education, we understand that like single-issue campaigning, academic disciplines function to fragment research and teaching into easily digestible units appropriate for standardized blocks of institution time. Like the stalls and pens that ensnare our animal nations, these methods of academia cage our desires to learn and explore. We must always remain committed to the cause of liberation, despite the venue. We seek to insert anti-speciesist and anti-capitalist polemics within our otherwise sterile and centrist avenues of the Academy, resisting the tendency for our colleagues to pigeonhole us as the, quote, animal rights lady or the pro-violence guy. When scholars speak of ecofeminism, critical race theory, and intersectionality, we will remind them that oppression does not start and stop with the human race, but extends to all creatures. We will defend the role of animal liberation to the Academy, while we are simultaneously attacked by other activists. We will endure the accusations of careerism, grandstanding, and armchair radicalism. Further, while we publicly champion the cause of freedom from atop our respective soapboxes, we must constantly stay grounded in the myriad of struggles in which we interact. In closing, we proclaim total solidarity with those in the Academy that sacrifice and struggle for liberation. Since we know that this communique and others like it will be seen by the relative few, it is up to us, teachers, professors, students, and researchers, to further these debates in the classroom, the journal page, and the book chapter. We need critical scholars to explain to cynics why a charred leather factory is a beautiful thing, or why thousands of minks escaping into the woods deserve heroic commemoration. We all have our heroes in this war. Some of us open cage doors, some of us light fires, some of us glue locks, and some of us explain these things to our students. Some of us do it all. Know that just because someone dons a cardigan and speaks from a podium does not mean they cannot sport a balaclava after the school bell chimes. We are here to say loud and clear, from the classrooms to the slaughterhouse, at the expense of our funding, at the expense of our prestige, at the expense of our freedom, animal liberation by any means necessary. And then we do a shout out in solidarity with political prisoners and various liberatory struggles around the world. So that's our communique, piece of our chapter, kind of sums up a bit of where we're coming from and where we hope the chapter goes and what it applies to. So I look forward to a Q&A afterwards.
Okay, we're going to allow Kim, and just to kind of prior to it, Kim and Vas recently have a cohort of friends that now travel all over, and you know, I think it's really wonderful that, you know, not only are we presenting, but we're building friendships, and they see themselves together as friends more in Europe than they do in the United States. So it's wonderful that you know, these conferences allow spaces to build friendships.
Is this good? Okay, my chapter was co-written with Dr. Les Mitchell from South Africa. So I'm just going to give some of the, it's about interdisciplinary studies and critical animal studies, and the subtitle is a holistic approach to confronting oppression. So my chapter with Les is about the critical relations of power and how those relations specifically affect those who suffer from the unjust exercise of social control. Simultaneously, we call for a response to diverse situations of injustice in terms of acting ethically whenever an individual or group is oppressed, thereby encompassing a greater understanding of how authority is formed and wielded. Within higher education, interdisciplinary studies, which I'll just call IS, challenges established boundaries between distinct fields of knowledge. IS has the potential to transform the academy by enriching text, classroom interactions, and degrees while reaching broader audiences. Similarly, critical animal studies, which I'll just refer to as CAS, is an inherently interdisciplinary field that encourages breaking down classic scholarly divisions within the academy. The first core principle of critical animal studies is to pursue interdisciplinary collaborative writing and research in a rich and comprehensive manner that includes perspectives typically ignored by animal studies, such as political economy. So that's the principle that we took on in this chapter. As non-human communities underlie to varying extents all human social customs, institutions, and structures, it is imperative that CAS become a filter through which oppression and domination of non-human animals, human, animals, and the environment are examined and contested. CAS as an academic field reflects dilemmas that arise within street-level animal advocacy, as animal activists are often and not always unfairly singled out as single-issue thinkers, as I know Carol mentioned in her presentation, unwilling to look at the broader implications of animal liberation's connection to other liberatory causes. Of course, this is not unique necessarily to animal advocacy, but to help others see animal liberation as a political issue, it is important that activists of all kinds begin to look at oppression intersectionally, which was also brought up, as initially theorized by Kimberly Crenshaw through her analysis of the ways in which the experiences of women of color are frequently the product of intersecting patterns of racism and sexism. CAS offers an effective paradigm for animal advocates who work outside of education. Further, CAS has wide applicability for identifying and critiquing currents of power and oppression in different academic and social contexts, offering a way to explore traditional disciplines in non-traditional ways. CAS is first and foremost a flexible field of study rather than a rigid set of parameters and theories, which is in essence, by its essence, inevitably reticulates into other areas. Critical animal pedagogy, or CAP, is an orientation that individual instructors of any field may adopt to help students and community members develop their own ideas, questions, and research into the nature of power and oppression. We do not want CAS to become a calcified academic area pursued by those already sold on the idea of animal liberation. If this were to happen, CAS could lose its applicability as an interdisciplinary theory that can influence understanding of the all-encompassing nature of oppression, but also exposing the oppression that underlies Western commodity culture from clothing to pharmaceuticals. Through scholarship, personal experience, and practical examples, in this chapter, Les and I demonstrate that CAS can be used as a lens through which other disciplines can view the world and its problems rhizomatically, in the sense developed by Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari. Deleuze and Guattari, coming from their respective fields of philosophy and psychoanalysis, famously critique the supposed stability and dogmatic nature of knowledge, structure in academia, and beyond, as they explain, quote, the rhizome, unlike the rooted tree, connects any point to any other point, and its traits are not necessarily linked to traits of the same nature. The tree imposes the verb to be, but the fabric of the rhizome is the conjunction and. This conjunction carries enough force to shake and uproot the verb to be. And I'll explain how I apply that. Their focus on multiplicity and the non-hierarchical nature of knowing sets a paradigm for the epistemology upon which CAS is founded. For its focus is not just on the single animal question to be, but the ways in which the animal question leads to and springs from questions about the emancipation of other oppressed groups, women, people of color, people with disabilities, and those in the LGBTQ community, and then the list can go on and on. In other words, the and of which they write. So the rhizome provides an apt visualization for the interconnectedness of oppression and the areas into which CAS scholars must encroach. From a macro perspective, the divide between disciplinary and interdisciplinary in higher education is comparable to the ways in which humans view themselves. Undoubtedly, the traditional disciplines have evolved as separate areas due to historical, cultural, and methodological reasons. This fragmentation is reflected not only in academic disciplines, but also in other life activities, where we compartmentalize and divide the world into discrete components. This trend has become more dominant with the physical development of production systems and an adoption of a Henry Fordist industrialized approach. So areas such as health and education, it is often difficult for us to really experience how societies in the past, and a few societies today, integrated the many aspects of their life. Our segmentation of the world has offered us many advantages in relation to the trade and distribution of goods and services. However, some groups have become significantly more materially advantaged than others in an increasingly frenetic, globalized, technologized world. And we are rapidly destroying our environment and the living communities of the earth. Segmentation has also severely restricted our understanding of ourselves as members of the Earth community, paradoxically limiting our discernment that our understanding is itself severely limited. As academics, it's come to think of ourselves as belonging to certain disciplines or carrying out work in a particular field. This is useful in many ways as we share with colleagues specialized in-depth work in the development of research tools. However, it can also be a process which limits our perspectives on the world, on what is acceptable, conforming to our discipline, what is unacceptable, differing from our discipline. Single disciplinary studies also carry the danger of limiting our creativity to a very narrow area. Further, in many ways, we fool ourselves into thinking that any one field of inquiry can never be unmoored from other disciplines from which we consciously and unknowingly borrow. So Les and I felt well suited to write this chapter on CAS and IS because despite our differing life paths, continents, and seemingly dissimilar disciplines, we both found ourselves on the board of the Institute for Critical Animal Studies. I was on the board from 2011 to 2013. Les is the director of a Center for Creativity in South Africa, and I teach English composition and literature in the United States. Other board members have degrees in education, conflict resolution, geography, cultural studies, psychology, and the list goes on. Still, other board members are not academics, but activists and political organizers, which is not to say that you can't be both, an academic and political organizer as well. Seemingly singular and far afield, our interest in crossing theoretical borders led to our shared ideologies on non-human animal and other social justice concerns. As a community college English generalist and community volunteer, I have found ways to integrate CAS into my discipline of English while encroaching into other fields. This project has manifested in two ways: through activist outreach and by applying CAS and CAP to literary works that up to this point have not been analyzed with thought to the non-human animal question or condition. The outreach potential as an animal advocate is pretty obvious. As activists often attend protests and table at events. However, there's a tendency to forget that educators, as has already been discussed, have ready audiences who can be challenged to look at those social issues in traditional literature in vibrant new ways with CAS as an interdisciplinary analytical lens. In 2011, the Animal Rights Coalition, a group with which I volunteer in Minneapolis, tabled at an event called Education Minnesota. So now I'm just going to offer some practical ways that you might incorporate CAS into an English classroom or other fields as well. So Education Minnesota is a convention directed toward kindergarten through high school teachers. And although ARC has a lot of material on like anti-dissection, you're not really vivisecting on K through 12, but pamphlets about not having pets in the classroom and things like that. They didn't have any takeaways for teachers from other disciplines. So I developed one for middle school and high school teachers that incorporated a critical animal studies perspective without announcing that that's what we were doing. So I made all these lesson plans, and I just want to tell you about one. And it was developed for social studies, history, or civic instructors, entitled Post-Civil War Lesson Assignment Plan and Exploration of Justice Movements in the United States, and for a middle school level. So I'm not a trained or certified to teach at that level, so I just kind of guessed that's what kids are learning at that time. But again, it's popular. So the plan encouraged students to explore the post-Civil War period as a founding era for the questioning of what and or who counts as property. Specifically, this lesson asked students to investigate the children's and or animal rights movements. And it would best be utilized in a history class that is just studying the Civil War, as students will need basic knowledge of slavery in the United States. Some foundational questions would be kind of easy to answer, I think, for students in middle school. What is property? What are rights? How are these definitions challenged during the Civil War? Why did early Americans think they had the right to own people? Where did this idea come from? What is racism? So then they'll define racism and be introduced to terms that they'll be maybe more familiar with. I'm assuming adultism, bias against children in favor of adults, and speciesism as well. With this foundation laid, students can research and write about the creation of either the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, which was the springboard for the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. Ideally, at least half the class would focus on animals and the other half on children and non-human animals. I realize it's a deep wording. Along with the historical overview, students would be asked to consider how the themes of American slavery, especially concerning property and rights, are also relevant to children's and animal rights organizations. And then, time permitting, students would be asked to investigate a current animal rights group and then a current group that is working for children. I think I'll skip a little bit of time. The other example I wanted to give would be how critical animal studies can be used in a literature class. So I have to do this to get funding from my school to actually talk about literature and stuff like that. Not that literature isn't great, but here's an example. In 1847, British writer Charlotte Bronte famously published the novel Jane Eyre. Probably many people have read Jane Eyre. In the story of the eponymous heroine, Bertha Mason is the dark, exotic, frightening, Caribbean, Jamaican-born man, woman of the attic, whom Bronte uses as a literary device and backdrop to the presumably more significant love story of Jane and Edward Rochester. As was common in the 19th century, Bertha provides a gothic, dark, mysterious, horrifying element to a traditional Victorian novel. And then in 1966, Dominican-born author Jean Rhys published Wide Sargasso Sea, a post-colonial novel providing a counter-narrative for Jane Eyre. In effect, post-colonial literature, whether written by the colonized or those from colonizing cultures, has attempted to give agency back to those who were subjects of imperialist domination, both as real individuals and within literary works that arose during the spread of European imperialism. So, if you're not familiar, Wide Sargasso Sea tells the story of Bertha Mason, thereby giving voice and power to a character who before was simply a means to a literary end. So Rhys's novel seemed to be the end of creating parallel plots to complement Jane Eyre's imperialist underpinnings. This is where CAS and CAP are applicable. Pilot, I don't know if anyone remembers Pilot from Jane Eyre, is another character in Jane Eyre, a Newfoundland dog framed as Rochester's loyal companion. So what of that dog's life? How are dogs bred and domesticated in the 19th century? And again, to make this applicable to the world we live in, which is the purpose of critical animal studies, what does that say of the Western world's current infantilization, fetishization, and abuse of canines? What if Pilot supposed natural subservience to Rochester and to humans in general? Similarly, what of the Newfoundland Nana in Jane and Barrie's Peter Pan, who's hired, in air quotes, or one could say forced by the Darling family's work as a governess for the family's children, much as was the poverty-stricken Jane Eyre. Indeed, the very idea of breeding and naming canines not without its problems and is ripe for further investigation against the real-world praxis. These are just some examples of how critical animal studies offers new ways to examine non-humans not as tropes, but as human constructs of what it means to be a non-human animal, which always appears to suggest in both literature and life, how can this creature be used to meet human ends? Our answers to these questions within our respective fields and other fields upon which we may impinge must be challenges to cultural assumptions as well. This means analysis not only for theory's sake, which you've heard mentioned already, but for application to the broad objectives of the animal liberation movement and the development of CAS as a field in pedagogy. So at this point, my question about post-speciesism literary theory, at least as it applies to Jane Eyre, is just supposition, but something I'd maybe like to explore, although I don't think we need new words such as post-speciesism. We'll see. I'm almost done. So the interdisciplinary nature of CAS is a far cry from the elite academy, preferencing some knowledge above others, theory-bound and closed with self-imposed limitations, and away from the real concerns of everyday life. We maintain that we cannot move towards a truer, more comprehensive understanding of the problems of power and oppression in their broadest incarnations without an interdisciplinary approach, an approach that offers so much, not the least of which might be emergent forms of knowledge and new knowledge groupings as of yet unthought. Scholars should not engage in critical animal studies just for idle interest as an academic pastime or a job passport. Rather, CAS scholars are, or must be, deeply socially engaged. Important things are at stake. There's real pain and suffering happening as I speak these words, maybe even happening right in this building on the higher floors. Loss and devastation, perpetrators and victims, oppressors and the oppressed. We need not only a melding of accepted disciplines and of traditional and non-traditional knowledge pursuits, but critically and without apology, we need our compassion, empathy, care, love, spirituality, hope, commitment, and solidarity to walk the road to liberation together. Only then can we truly speak of an interdisciplinary mission. Thank you.
Before I start, there's just a couple of people I'd like to thank. I'd like to thank the editors. We have a couple of them here. And it's not only the presenter, she's also one of the editors of the volume. All of them were fantastic to work with. My co-editor, my co-author of the individual chapters, Stephanie Jenkins, she's also going to be here in person, although I feel she's very much here in spirit, but she was fantastic to work with. And Helena Patterson, she and I co-edited the Critical Animal Studies book series. And I feel the need to caveat everything I say, all right, because we have these 3-hour marathon conversations that start at midnight and go to 3 a.m., and I have no idea how to cite that, but everything I think or say is informed in these conversations, so she's co-ghost author of this and everything else. And finally, just briefly, Joe, I've had the pleasure, the burden, to organize a couple of conferences and symposiums myself, and I know what an unbelievable amount of work it is, and he has been outstanding at every moment and every level. One struggle. Critical animal studies rejects the exploitation of animal life as an ontological, epistemological, and etho-political strategy. It disrupts the anthropocentrism that produces the human as a set of cognitive and morphological criteria for moral considerability. Furthermore, it requires the rejection of 3 key assumptions that govern an ethical and political theory. 1, the dichotomy between theory and practice. 2, the etho-political significance of species membership. And 3, the isolation of animal liberation movements from human concerns. Specifically, the talk today will focus on what's referred to as the 6th principle of critical animal studies, namely that we reject reformist, single-issue, nation-based, legislative, strictly animal interest politics in favor of alliance politics and solidarity with other struggles against oppression and hierarchy. Stated differently, critical animal studies scholars champion the one struggle against all forms of domination. We contest the naturalness of the human-animal dichotomy and reveal how the interlockings of classism, ableism, nationalism, gender norms, and racism continue to the oppression of all humans, all animals, and we must work against this. Critical animal studies articulates the call to respond to the violence perpetuated in the name of such norms. Engaged veganism is the corresponding commitment to minimizing violence against all human or non-human animal life. In responding to this one struggle against exploitation, critical animal studies deploys engaged veganism as a strategy. It is a technology for the care of the self that explicitly problematizes the boundaries of the moral community. Engaged veganism does not treat moral considerability as a uniquely human characteristic. Instead, it understands the idea of moral community to represent only a construct of historically contingent power relations. Treating the human as naturally superior species rather than a cognitive and morphological norm conceals how the idea of a divine chain of being isolates humans from caring relations with other than the human world. The biological criteria used to justify anthropocentric ownership and management of life on Earth are not neutral ahistorical facts, but rather only human-made rationalizations for perpetuating and intensifying our exploitation of both human and non-human life. Point one, anthropocentrism. Anthropocentrism reinforces itself through the naturalization and valorization of human superiority. Non-human animals are de-individualized as generic natural kinds, i.e. animals in general are a species rather than as an individual. You heard about all this time in concerns about biodiversity. We have to protect the species. We don't have to worry about the individual. And disembodied as only parts or products, like meat or leather, or like a leg of lamb. Both non-human animals and so-called subhuman lives become classified as only what Agamben terms bare life, or biological resources that humans can use to pursue their own desires, goals, and projects. Existing merely as equipment or raw material, the less than human world becomes rendered as an amoral realm that cannot be harmed or violated because such descriptive categories demand the etho-ontological judgment that non-human creatures are worthy of moral considerability in the first place. Deviation from the species type of Homo sapiens becomes evidence of animals of inferiority or justification for their instrumentalization. Difference is degraded rather than respected. In addition to the production of non-human animals as deprived and morally valuable human characteristics, human subjects are likewise constituted so they understand moral community as membership in an elite class of life, natural rights, and dignity belong to animals with the privilege of being born human. Moral status is granted through the capacity or potential capacity to perform functions definitiveness of humanness, such as self-consciousness, cognitive rationality, vision-centered perception, and so forth. Consequently, while extraordinary animals with unusual and advanced capabilities may charitably be granted some degree of citizenship in the moral community, for example, primates, whales, certain companion animals, moral standing functions as a finite commodity that can be taken away from humans or non-humans deemed incapable of passing these membership requirements. Moral considerability, defined as the recognition that another being intrinsically requires respect and intention, hinges on unconscious selective habits of perception, affect, and response. Through repeated performance, patterns of care disguise, transmit, and perpetuate unexamined beliefs about what sort of bodies are relevant to etho-political decision-making. Moral citizens ignore the suffering of beings recognized as only tools available for humanity's entertainment, education, or consumption. Moral concern, as a prerequisite to responsibility, determines the difference between a hamburger and a corpse, animal husbandry and systematic murder, a circus or compulsory labor. However, because these judgment acts at the level of unconscious habituated bodily reactions, critical animal studies must continually challenge these norms of moral considerability. Anthropocentric privilege defines the criteria for inclusion in the moral community through the glorification of human-centered capabilities. As the judge and jury of moral worth, humanity controls the terms and the outcomes of the competition for simply being considered. Consequently, other life forms become valuable only insofar as they are similar to us. As a power knowledge regime, the animal-industrial complex maps the horrifying deaths of innumerable non-human animals through appeals to their supposed inferior existence. I.e., animal deaths are not even believable because their lives no longer are allowed to count. Subhuman capabilities, i.e. those who cannot even fear death or cannot even die. Ivory says that. He says animals cannot even die. They're not even alive enough to be able to die. And necessary demise, i.e. human survival justifies their death. Part 2, engaged veganism. In contrast, engaged veganism is a counter-discipline informed by critical animal study principles. However, engaged veganism represents not simply abstention from non-animal food sources. Instead, engaged veganism refuses complicity with the symbolic and symbolically disrupts the instrumentalized and hierarchization of human over animal life. Insofar as engaged veganism necessitates a micro-political revolution at the level of embodied perception, aesthetic taste, and effective responses, engaged veganism enacts a radical care ethic that explicitly investigates socially given assumptions about who counts as recipients of moral concern. Critical animal scholars, as engaged vegans, do not accept the predefined boundaries of respect, even when those standards are presented as naturally predetermined accounts of universal rights, biological capabilities, or social political organization. Engaged veganism brings from the assumption that intellectual inquiry and ethical action must be held accountable for the rift they count between subjects worthy of the right to life and self-determination and amoral beings whose interests need not be considered in ethical judgment. As a self-transformation via a counter-discipline, engaged veganism creates a shift that dissolves the terrorized boundaries of the moral community. Critical animal study principles require that ethical practice and moral theory begin from a presupposition of the inherent value of animal life. Those who seek to instrumentalize animals, whether human or other than human, carry the burden of justifying exceptions to the presumed inviolability. Or as I said to Joel Salatin, the question should not be, why are you vegan? The question should always be, why do you choose to eat animals? Hence, the key and wholly motivating purpose of Principle 6 is a firm, unwavering normative commitment to ending the exploitation of all animals for human consumption and pleasure. An animal lives as not merely a concept or a metaphor, but instead a real, living, and embodied organism who requires our respect, support, and solidarity. Non-human animals are not property. Consequently, they should not be bought and sold at the whim of their owners, nor raised and killed for human consumption as meat, as leather, as fur, or in any other product. Additionally, non-human animals should not be experimented on for cosmetics or household products, or for supposed scientific or medical benefits. In fact, engaged veganism goes so far as to oppose all the harmless daily humiliations and examples of species privilege that are visited in non-human animals every day, being forced to perform in circuses, used to sell products, forced into movies for humanity's amusement, and objectified to species terminology and jokes. In short, engaged vegans reject and live opposed to all examples of anthropocentric privilege and human exceptionalism. For engaged veganism is not only about abstaining from eating animals, but instead represents an entire social justice worldview, of which individual dietary choice represents only the tip of the iceberg. To make an analogy, the boycotts of segregated businesses in U.S. civil rights movements, lunch counters, buses, was not about the segregated based counters only at lunch counters and buses, but about a holistic rejection of racism, Jim Crow, and segregation-based identities. So too, we wish to offer our condemnation of the meat, dairy, and egg industry as not only about the violence and exploitation inherent in the production of meat, dairy, and egg, but also as a rejection of speciesism and anthropocentric-based ethics. For these reasons, engaged veganism extends into any point of contact with the animal-industrial complex, including entertainment, scientific research, clothing, and challenges the commodification of life via global capitalism. We distinguish engaged veganism from boycott veganism because the latter's main activist effort is abstention from the consumption of non-human animal products without consideration of human or environmental cost. Boycott veganism conflates conspicuous consumption with ethical action and political change. Simply replacing animals with plant-based products only transfers capital to global corporations through different mechanisms. Boycott veganism serves to reinforce capitalist institutions and neoliberal social structures that promote the commodification of life and disguise market forces as neutral, amoral means of distributing social goods. Furthermore, limiting activism to an economic boycott undercuts the moral force of veganism by reducing it to an individual lifestyle choice. Promoting moral progress by voting with our dollars leaves ethical responses to the exploitation of human and non-human animals to the will of the market. As a practice, promoting critical animal studies principles engage veganism refuses to treat moral considerability and virtue as commodities that can be purchased, traded, or given as a charity. Just give one example of what I mean when I talk about a boycott vegan. Have you ever heard of Neiman Ranch? It is the largest producer of so-called humane meat, and I'll be speaking about it in my other presentation. Well, Nicolette Neiman calls herself a vegan because she herself doesn't eat the very product that she produces. Our argument is that type of veganism has to be rejected. The CEO of Whole Foods calls himself a vegan, even though the #1 profit center for Whole Foods is the sale of so-called humane meat, again, that he himself wouldn't eat. So there are people who are choosing to simply abstain from animal flesh, but would not be vegan in what we consider a critical animal studies, or what we call engaged veganism. So we distinguish engaged veganism from boycott veganism. The choice to be a vegan or to remain complicit with everyday anthropocentrism is not an amoral lifestyle, dietary, or any other mode by which human individuals can freely stylize their existence. It is not a decision that can be characterized as a matter of preference. We do not consider human freedom to be limited by a prohibition against murder. Refusals to engage in rape or consuming chocolate produced using involuntary child labor are not considered deprivations precisely because, as morally indefensible actions, rape and child slavery are not available as free choices. In a similar manner, engaged veganism cannot be understood as only an abstention from animal products. Rather, this practice is an ethico-political strategy through which we create ways of being, kinds of pleasures, communities, and institutions that cultivate new practices of care that are not dependent on the exploitation of non-human animal life as only a raw material. Conclusion. We have work to do. Critical animal studies informed engaged veganism must acknowledge, support, and sustain direct action taken for the purpose of minimizing violence against animal life. Direct action for animals fits with a long tradition of civil disobedience and social justice activism. Critical animal supports these activists and these actions. Some feminists, such as Carol Adams and Marty Gill, have criticized direct action as a hyper-masculinist approach to social change. Moreover, there are relevant issues of class, race, and citizen privilege that define the stakes and underpin the ability to engage in any direct action at all. For example, the risk of being arrested is significantly different for an undocumented worker than a full citizen. Critical animal studies support for direct action is not a universal mandate to engage in direct action. Direct action should not be seen as a higher form of action. Rather, like the anti-colonial, anti-apartheid, and anti-capitalist movements before it, critical animal studies as a social justice movement can only succeed if it deploys a diversity of tactics. Critical animal scholars and advocates support engaged veganism but remain open to the critique of specific tactics. This is the final and most important guiding principle for the oneness of the struggle for human and non-human animals. Real, concrete, direct action is necessary in order to help actual animals and to end their suffering. In other words, critical animal scholars must not only write to activists, we must also write as activists. Our overreaching goal will be for critical animal studies to echo Foucault's call for his theory to serve as a kind of toolbox others can rummage through, to find a tool they can use however they wish in their own area. I don't write for an audience, Foucault says. I write for users, not readers. Critical animal scholars write for users, including activists, comrades, and supporters. Critical animal studies matters because we believe that is not only our goal to interpret the world, non-human animals, speciesism, global destruction, etc. The point is for critical animal studies activists and academics working together to actually change it. Thank you.
And then if we have time, we will take any questions from the audience.
So just to reiterate what Larry just said, we'll take questions first for Vas and Kim, and then if we have time, Jenny and Carol, who are via Skype, will type those in. Again, I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions. The book is out there for a lot off. I think we're just paying for shipping. So that's pretty much it. Just to kind of reiterate, as Boss was noting, that every single person in the book had to co-author with somebody, and most of those people they did not know. So as academics and as activists, we're very individualistic and very strong-minded. And it was very difficult, and we repetitively, through the editors, saw conflicts emerge. And you know, as a conflict transformation, you see conflict and you see it as an opportunity. And you know, we have to learn how to work together. And if we can't get two people in a book to write on animal liberation together, how are we supposed to, you know, quote, win this movement? And I think that's what this kind of representation of this book and the construction of it. So when you're looking at this book and you're like, oh, these co-author, it was strategic on purpose. And to co-edit with 4 people was very difficult as well. So again, thank you everybody. I know Jenny and Carol can't hear us, but again, I'm going to ask for an ableist action. If you have a question, comment, would like to add something, just raise your hand. If you can't, you can wiggle or poke somebody to let you know. Any thoughts or comments? Would like to challenge them? Yes.
I'll try to be succinct. Thank you so much for your presentations. All of the presentations really evoked a lot of questions for me. But I do have one. I kind of want to bring together a couple of things. I can see how the book might have been difficult to put together because even in these 4 presentations, I see quite a few different ideas that, you know, potentially conflict or with each other. And so in the first presentations, I did hear an idea that, sorry, I have notes, that classrooms are cerebral places and that activism happens in the street or in physical places. And that I also heard something about meaningful change does not happen in the classroom, which I wrote down because I found it provocative. And then it was interesting for the next 2 presentations, one that dealt with critical animal studies, pedagogy, and then one that ended with an idea of engaged veganism and a call for diverse techniques and tactics. And so, I guess my question is, can we so easily divide the classroom from the streets? I wonder if we start questioning what activism is or what meaningful change is. These are words that have been repeated, and just to clarify, to give you a sense of where I'm coming from, I did become involved in critical animal studies through a classroom, and I have become engaged in activism in my community. And so I really thought that the meaningful change, for me at least, started in the classroom, and then I'm continuing now on in my education and doing my PhD, and I'm studying post-colonial labor theory. And I am increasingly noticing how complex the world we live in is. And Kim, you brought up and you know, all the debates that are going on there, and of course, Spivak coming and doing that wonderful analysis and showing how Western feminism might be based on this assumption of individualism, et cetera, et cetera. So these are important critical interventions anyways happening at the level of academics, and then, you know, providing for shifts and paradigms that hopefully inform, you know, activism in general. And so I wonder if, after that very long and essay-like question, you can just give me an answer of how you see academic, the potential for the academy actually become an activist space. Thank you.
I have something to say about that. I think, I don't know who exactly. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so there was a slight difference in how the classroom was posed. I think, and I'm just guessing, because I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but I think it's this idea of the classroom is not a space for radical change, if it's just like the whole pursuing theory for theory's sake. It's when you do take it to the streets, which students can do once they leave the classroom, it's happened to you. And kind of what I was trying to get at is, you know, I go to protests and rallies, and, you know, maybe me and, if I'm lucky, 10 other people, or maybe more if I'm really lucky. And a lot of people just ignore us or laugh at us or, you know, drive by quickly. And that's why I look at the classroom as I have, as a community college instructor, potentially 100 to 120 students per semester. You know, I teach a lot of freshman comp that they have to take. You know, we have these ready audiences. Like, my thought was, let's use these to, kind of like Jenny said, I don't like using the terminology push an agenda, but I like to look at it as, use it as a space for students to look at things differently. So I would think that the classroom can absolutely be a site for radical change. And as teachers, we have this amazing opportunity, especially at the age, you know, when students are questioning everything, to have them look at, so like I teach in composition, we'll do a couple essays on issues of food ethics. I'll have someone come in and talk about veganism, and you know, that's something I wouldn't have done before. I would have thought it was not appropriate to have, you know, my own ideas and trying to, in some way, force it on students, but it isn't that. I present it as, you can hear somebody talk about this, and I'm not saying any of my students have gone vegan, but they said that eating meat makes them feel guilty now, so that's one step in the right direction, I suppose. So yeah, I would think that it's a site for change. And I think maybe the comment was just when you're just pursuing critical animal studies as a job passport, which is a term from my chapter with Les, not that you can really get a job with some critical animal studies on.
Question, comment, but go ahead.
Just say that Carol and Jenny are both going to try to post their answer to that question on Facebook, because I think it's largely about their presentations.
And just to respect time, I know we're going to go over. We're about 10, 15 minutes. So we just have, like, you know, maybe 2 more comments.
Here you
There's somebody right here.
Oh,
sorry.
I just have a question for the last presenter. So, I really appreciate all the presentations. They were really good. So you define engaged veganism as not just abstaining from, you know, eating meat and things like that, but to actually take action. But then I got the sense that, you know, I'm a little biased because I work as an accountant, but I got the sense that you sort of dismissed some of the actions, particularly sort of, you know, how we vote with our dollars. And as someone who's worked in accounting and who, you know, are involved in financial statements and, you know, earnings reports, and I see how corporations pay great attention to you know, how dollars are spent. I think in a society we live in today, we know with capitalism, in the U.S., I almost think that one of the strongest actions you can make, actually, one of the best actions, probably one of the actions that probably will produce the results that you want, is to vote with your dollars. I mean, that sends a strong signal to heads of corporations as to what their customers want. So, I mean, I don't know if that was the intention, or maybe I misinterpreted it, but I see that. I mean, I walk around a lot. I'm not saying I'm not dismissing protesting and standing up with signs, and that's really, really great. But sometimes I see that a lot, and I think, okay, that makes you feel good as an individual, but what's the actual tangible result? I mean, what happens from that? And I think you probably would produce more results in certain cases from voting with your dollars, versus going up and, standing in front of the corporation and saying, hey, don't buy their products. So I don't know if you have a response to that.
I do. I think, pardon me, it's loud again. Something about me and mics. I think that was a fantastic question. And what I would say is, just even think about the phrase, voting with your dollars. If you really believe that, then you think that people who have more dollars get more votes, and their opinions matter more. And we already see that, and we see it particularly in like the humane or the locavore movement. And what I worry about is this idea that somehow we can somehow exempt ourselves from the violence that's happening to animals because we're able to choose a vegan diet. When there's places throughout the country, for example, where there's food deserts, it's actually quite difficult to vote with your dollars. My partner and I chose to live in a food desert in Oakland, California, and where we chose to live, within biking distance, there were no grocery stores. There were 6 liquor stores. And in these liquor stores, which they classify as grocery stores, the US government does to make it seem like there's no, I don't know if they have that intent, but has that effect to make it seem like these food deserts vanish. We would see people regularly trying to buy food of the food options that they had there. Not buying liquor, but trying to buy their juice at that liquor store. So what I'm saying is we have to think intersectionally and realize that voting with your dollars is a position that privileges those people with those dollars. And that we need to think of new ways of activism that can critique not just animal exploitation, but the types of human exploitation that go hand in hand with that type of animal exploitation.
We have 2 more comments, one here and then one there, and then we do have to wrap up after these 2 individuals.
Okay, my name is Sophia Tanner. I'm a supporter of the Revolutionary Communist Party, and just how I look at things. And it's the first time I've come to anything like this. It's very, not only informative, but inspiring, actually, and I really uphold a lot of stuff that's been said here, the need to break down the walls, academia and the mass people who built those walls, actually, those universities, etc. And tile struggles together. The thing is that in mentioning and bringing out commodification of other beings and knowledge, and even speaking of capitalism, it seems to me like it's one of many things in the mix. I wanted to read something and then say one more thing and then get comment, feedback, whatever. This is something from Bob Avakian, the leadership of the Revolutionary Communist Party. He says, this system and those who rule over it are not capable of carrying out economic development to meet the needs of the people now, while balancing that with the needs of future generations and requirements of safeguarding the environment. They care nothing for the rich diversity of the earth and its species, for the treasures that this contains, except when and where they can turn this into a profit for themselves. These people are not fit to be caretakers of the earth. Now that said, focusing on the question of capitalism, the planet is burning. We're talking about life on this planet. That, to me, concentrates, much about what is being struggled to, confront front in this conference or thus far, our responsibilities to life on this planet, all life. And I can't see, and I don't think there is, any solution short of revolution. And so with all of the concerns that are being spoken to here and the moral stance, I think that that's what has to be spoken to as well. And I'm talking about revolution, which removes one state power and constructs something else. So, you know, for everybody, and most especially, I guess, the speakers up here.
Thank you so much.
I guess I'll make a brief comment. I do believe that the commodity fetish is intrinsic to the entire process by which living bodies are turned into merely viable and sellable things. It's hard to imagine a more perfect analogy of the commodity fetish. The meat comes from nowhere. I would just add that I think that's where occurring is a post-commodity fetish in the locavore humane meat, where part of the appeal is this idea that somehow they can transcend the commodity fetish. All of these locavores who take such pride in actually killing their own animals and in seeming to supposedly transcend the commodity fetish, they actually think that they can somehow buy their way out of the commodity fetish or kill their way out of the commodity fetish, and I think that's untrue. So I do think that a lot of, of course, everything we're saying is the critique of capitalism goes hand in hand with the critique of anthropocentrism, and or critique of anthropocentrism goes hand in hand with the critique of capital. Capital, the word itself, comes from the heads of cattle.
It sounds like a plug, I guess that's what it is. Tomorrow I'm giving another talk on anarchism as a apolitical ideology and capitalism as a commodity fetish. So I talk a little bit about this idea of change, of complete revolution. So, might interest you.
We have one more person, and just to kind of plug ICAST, we have a budget of maybe like $2,000 max, like globally. So, and we're fully volunteer. So all the events, all the websites, everything you see is people, and we don't want to have a paid employee. We want to try, as some people might know, insight. We want to challenge the nonprofit industrial complex, that a movement has to be paid employees. So, we have conferences and events all over the world, and they're all completely volunteer. And because we need to make sure that we're, in it for the right reasons. Kind of note that. The last comments or questions?
Basically, when you talk about critical studies, I always think in mathematical terms, like competing forces that balance at a point. And I was wondering if you could comment on the relative rank of two values, like two forces that might be acting on this point. And the first one is obviously liberating animals, but the second one is using, we could call it direct conflict versus persuasion, or if you wanted to be more extreme about it, maybe oppression or force to achieve ends. And I would like your comments on the relative importance of those two values in your thinking, philosophy.
I'll just speak briefly to that, and I think it takes a variety of tactics. So, one person's persuasion won't necessarily affect somebody else as far as a tactic goes. I was giving a talk once at a college, and I just said, I went vegan while watching this particular documentary, and someone asked me, well, what's the name? Because I want to go vegan too, as if she would have the same reaction I did. Some people can eat a hamburger while watching a slaughterhouse video and won't bother them at all. Other people will watch it and feel bad and then still go eat a hamburger, and other people, their perspectives will change. So I don't know if that's completely answering your questions. Once I heard mathematics, my brain started to, like, all these misfires. But I think, it takes all different strategies.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, animal liberation might be a 10, and the means to achieve that liberation
Well, when I think,
like a 5 or something.
I think to really answer that, I would have to give you my definition of animal liberation. Is not about just tomorrow opening all the cage doors, which, what would we, it's about liberating the human mind. That's the only way other species will be liberated, is, so my take on that, I mean, I support live, actually liberating animals from places of captivity, but those will be very small victories, we'll say, and they're largely symbolic, but they're good for those animals who are saved. But I think of when I think of liberation, animals would be in that, other animals would be in that position if it wasn't for human perception. So that's kind of how I define it, is a liberation of human.
Persuasion could also be a tactic, and there
absolutely.
Are people in the movement that adopt that tactic more, perhaps, than direct confrontational approaches.
And that's why I think there is a need for both, because what works for somebody won't work for another person. Someone needs the angry activist yelling in their face to confront their own horrible actions, and other people will respond well to a more gentle approach. So, for me, it was actually seeing Behind the Mask, which was about the Animal Liberation Front, which is, I went vegan after seeing that.
I'll just make one very brief comment. My own experience, certainly, my partner and I have helped encourage more people to go vegan by inviting them over and feeding them delicious vegan food than probably anything else we've ever done. And certainly one of the biggest hurdles people have is even that it's possible that they won't die. And when I teach animal studies classes, the 2 goals I hope for my students to get is that they won't die if they go vegan, and that meat is actually the dead body of an animal. And if we get there, that's a resounding success. What I will say is that all those scenes you see of what occurs in a factory farm, someone had to engage in illegal direct action for any of those videos to exist. So if you ever saw a video or read a book and it affected you about what happens in a factory farm, someone broke the law to get that to you.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. As you know, the conference is just getting going. More people will be coming in. Please, for the people on the left or the right of you, introduce yourself. Build relationships, build networks. And if there is a situation that you don't feel safe in or it's not accessible, please let us know. We will try to address these things in a very inclusive manner. And so importantly, please respect the space that is around us. The building, so if you see trash on the ground, or if you put trash on the ground, please pick it up after you. We do want Rice University to say, wow, they were great, guests in our home. So thank you so much for everyone coming, and have a wonderful time.